Man, it is tough to know where to even begin when it comes to covering Ashes Afterglow. Truth be told, I would have had a video out about this particular total conversion mod much earlier if it wasn't for the fact that I committed the cardinal sin of doing a complete playthrough of the damn thing and forgetting to actually hit record. As is the case when it comes to the wonderfully creative world of Doom modding, the wheels don't stop turning and the mods don't stop coming, so for a while there, unfortunately, Ashes Afterglow got lost in the shuffle. Until now. For those of you out of the loop when it comes to the Ashes series, you'll know that it is quote-unquote some really good shit. For those of you unfamiliar with the majesty of the series so far, the Ashes series has absolutely nothing to do with international test cricket, but instead begins in earnest with Ashes 2063, a Doom total conversion mod featuring the post-apocalyptic misadventures of one wasteland scavenger dredging up enough junk to trade at local settlements and trying not to get his head blown off and or caved in by lawless raider gangs or rampaging cannibal mutants, respectively. Basically take a few parts Metro, Stalker, and Fallout, a sprinkling of Mad Max, and a smattering of John Carpenter vibes for good measure, and you'll get the feel for the Ashes series in general. It's a shockingly well-realized setting that is so effectively immersive that it's often easy to forget that you're even playing a Doom total conversion mod to begin with. Even now, that descriptor feels like it does the series a disservice. These are practically their own fully fledged games, and for some mad reason, they're free.
It's free real estate.
What I'm really trying to tell you here is, if any of this intro has piqued your interest, you should do yourself a favor and go play Ashes 2063, even the prequel episode Dead Man Walking, and heck, just go play Ashes Afterglow right now. Don't delay. I can wait. And besides, when it comes to talking about the meat of Ashes Afterglow, despite doing my best to avoid any narrative discussion, there will, naturally, be spoilers. So, let's get started, shall we? You'd think that it would be hard for our intrepid Scav protagonist to continue after the events of Ashes 2063, considering that it culminated in practically an entire skyscraper being dropped on his very much non-steel reinforced head. That said, Scavs are survivors at heart, and this one just keeps on ticking, which is good really, considering that there's a lot more of the journey left to go. So, whereas Ashes 2063 dispenses with a more traditionally linear sequence of levels during the course of its campaign, Afterglow instead centers its action around the presence of two distinct hubs. The first of which will actually be familiar to anyone that's played the preceding episode of Ashes, what with it being Michonne Station, a safe haven in the relatively threatening feeling underground. The guards here are distinctly frostier about your presence, however, considering all sorts of shit has hit the fan since you last blew through town. Something about the mutants moving en masse and devastating previously safe station settlements in their wake. Rather than dropping you straight into this hub, however, Afterglow takes a little time to get you in the mood and reacquaint you with the Scaver mindset with an opening level, bar of course the optional tutorial that sees you picking your way through a gang-occupied supermarket. Much like the opening level of Ashes 2063, it practically forms a thesis statement for how the structure of most levels and locations are going to operate going forward. Real-world style locations that flow with a sense of real-world logic, sprinkled, of course, with oodles of secret hunting opportunities. We are supposed to be scavengers, after all. Some stuff that certainly sticks in my mind about this opening level includes the fact that there is an aisle here simply labeled Pain, the fact that the manager of this place once appeared to be John Romero, replete with goodies hidden behind his portrait, and the fact that you can shoot this cable tether through this here gap to drop an elevator in an adjacent building, bagging yourself some extra supplies and all-important junk in the process. Oh, and there's shooting. Lots of shooting. Plenty of raiders to make go bye-bye. Wheeling back to the junk, however, junk in the Ashes universe essentially forms the foundation of its post-apocalyptic economy. Find enough of it and you can exchange it for supplies back at the hub and use myriad upgrade benches to enhance your weaponry. If you're particularly savvy at seeking out secrets during the first half of Afterglow, you'll have something like a fully upgraded SMG among other weapon enhancements before you even hit latter areas of Michonne Hub. On the subject of weapons, I always take note when a game provides you with a starting handgun that actually feels worth a damn. The revolver, for example, handily takes down a standard goon in a single shot, though that's balanced out with having relatively low fire rate, and obviously the need to reload after 6 shots. Interestingly, it's not long before you also acquire a weapon that I affectionately refer to as the Poop Glock. The Poop Glock takes a 16-round mag and boasts lower damage per shot, but at a much faster fire rate. They're both effective weapons. Just an interesting choice to have 2 flavors of the same category available at such an early juncture. The Poop Glock, despite cleaning up well and looking pretty sweet with a laser sight upgrade, does kind of fall by the wayside once you bag yourself that aforementioned SMG, doubly so when you consider that they both share the same ammo pool. That revolver though, oh man, that thing gets good use for practically the entire duration. The pump-action shotgun is another relatively early acquisition. It's a good shotgun. What else is there to say? Gives good boomstick. Takes down those heftier raiders, bug dogs, I think they're called pit fiends, and mutants in potentially one shot if you nail them just right. And once upgraded, you can save ammo by sticking things with the pointy end. Post-supermarket dash, you'll find your way back to Michonne, where you can reacquaint yourself with the NPCs proper and get some vital information on the main objective you'll be pursuing, namely that of your bike being trashed and needing parts to get it back in working order. Outside of that main objective, talking to some of the denizens of Michonne will also clue you into various side objectives which you can complete along the way, be it rustling up supplies, tracking down missing people, or providing a chemical edge to assist a contender in the local fight pit. Believe it or not, how you choose to engage with these objectives can also alter the kind of ending you'll experience, so it's well worth paying them more than passing attention. In terms of the first place you'll want to visit, the West Side Motorcycle Emporium is probably the most efficient place to start. This is where you'll be able to bag yourself some all-important fuel, not to mention a key that'll come in very handy when accessing a latter area. Firstly though, you'll need to make a decision. Do I blast these raiders directly in the face for having the gall to tell me to take a hike? Or do I sneak in through the back and whack them all over the head with a crowbar instead? Either way, it's a fun, relatively contained location, seeing you fight your way through not just the office areas, but then the garage, crash a party, much to the chagrin of its attendees, before learning that maybe having a live exposed wire across a pool of flammable material isn't the best way to ensure this entire place doesn't go up in smoke. Ah well. It's not my fault they didn't just want to lend me some gasoline. After leaving Westside a smoldering ruin, the next location that'll beckon you is the Flooded District over to the east. If Westside was a taster session, the Flooded District is an all-you-can-eat buffet. This earlier section of the Flooded District will see you tiptoeing your way through the remnants of an abandoned mall, taking out the occasional pit fiend and mutant as you go before worming your way into the back of this old arcade and administering some concussive therapy before flipping on the generator. Doing so causes a few more muties to become alerted to your presence, but hey, great target practice for testing out your recently acquired double-barrel shotgun. After that, it's on to a pretty damn good part of the Flooded District that I simply refer to as the street. The street will see you battling up one side, skirmishing with raiders via shops and laundromats as you go, before finding passage to the other side and gate-crashing a gang meeting at the Chinese restaurant. Fun fact, the Master Blaster, on top of being a fantastic way to char grill your enemies with its explosive fireballs, There's actually a secret stash pickup here at the restaurant. Just hit this gong, sprint to the stash, and there. You can have that one as a freebie. If that wasn't enough, this section literally blasts on through to a library via burger shop wall remodeling. Here you can hunt down some switches to bag a recurring safe-bound bonus, and then it's onwards, carving through raiders as you go, to a full-fledged multi-story car park out back. This has an ingenious bit of structure to it, where you need to find ways to raise the water level in order to access higher floors. There's also a mild mutant infestation to deal with, and once you reach the top, a fallen scaffold will cross you back over to the building you just left, replete with access back to the library, which just tickles that part of my brain that loves the way Dark Souls shortcuts are put together. Beyond, you can appreciate some fine art for your efforts, and finally cap off the experience with a glorious trip to the laser tag. So yeah, the flooded district. It's a damn good time. Post-area exploration here will potentially see you conversing with another scavenger who's taken up residence in a local church. He's the one responsible for dragging you out of the collapsed spire ruins. He's a little strange, but equally just as helpful if you're looking for direction, pointing you back to west side if you've not already raised it to the ground, because the key that you'll have picked up out back by the assembly line is actually the key that'll grant you access to the Gap. The Gap is pretty much a hellhole, albeit a fabulously designed hellhole. Just as sprawling, if not a smidge more so, than the flooded district, where the radiation is plentiful and the residents very appreciative of fresh man-flesh. I dive into the minutiae of this location, but considering it's practically the final main area that spins off this first hub, I'll leave most of its happenings for you to discover for yourself. Just make sure you've got plenty of anti-rads, plenty of ammunition, and keep some eyes peeled while you're at it, because this location introduces you to some delightful and not at all infuriating explosive tripwire placement. Naturally, there are other locations within range of the Michonne hub that are optional, but well worth seeking out. If not for the chance of extra supplies and side objective completion, but also for more positive end credit outcomes. Additionally, Afterglow also features a series of secret levels where retrieving a key from one will beget access to another further down the line. All I'll tell you here is that it involves some canny exploration during the Gap, and involves revisiting a prominent area from the preceding episode. Having dealt with most of this, you should now have all of the requisite parts needed to fix up the old Roadhog, finish up any obligations to Michonne residents, and wave goodbye to the station as a whole. You're shipping out and heading north, leaving the irradiated ruins of Atlanta behind. And oh god, what the fuck are these things doing here? Oh man, this section that bridges the first and second hub areas is flat out fantastic. A trip that will see you blasting through the last few remaining wasteland roads on the back of your newly repaired motorbike, taking in the sights and scavenging opportunities as you go. I remember having a few issues with how the motorbike controlled back in Ashes 2063, but honestly I feel like I had less problems with it this time around. Can't figure if that's through any particular finesse with how it actually steers, or whether I've just bashed into enough walls to acclimatize to its particular quirks. Either way, you'll be able to hop off at a few stops along the way if you feel like checking out points of interest, or not. In all honesty, the only mandatory points that require you to actually get off your bike during this section are the Raider checkpoint, where you need to open up some hefty floodgates, and then once more at a gatehouse where you need to buzz an intercom for access. In all honesty though, it's worth keeping that scaver's mindset. After all, the more you explore, the more junk and supplies and, yes, of course, adversaries you're likely to come across. But when the action feels this good, why not indulge? Shock twist, by the way, a union of raiders and mutants separate you from your beloved bike, landing you in this absolutely fantastic stadium level where the mutants, generally pissed at how you seem to be murdering the shit out of them wherever you go, have decided to make an example out of you. An example, I might add, that seems strongly inspired by that one bit from Escape from New York. You know, the bit where he has to fight the big guy in a nappy. Or maybe that one bit from Escape from LA. That one where he's on a basketball shot clock, and if he doesn't make the shot, he gets shot. We don't talk about Escape from LA so much. Not unless you get a few drinks in me first. Suffice to say, this punishment for murdering so many mutants results in you murdering a whole lot more mutants. Who could have seen that coming? Turns out they didn't reckon with your skill with a crowbar, and once you survived enough time in the arena, an opportunity will open up for escape. Thankfully, your equipment is stashed handily in a nearby locker room, and after that it's time to remind the muties who they're dealing with. At this point, you'll also encounter a fresh variety of mutant that's infuriatingly handy at hiding behind a shield and peppering you with a shotgun blast. They are annoying, especially in numbers, but there are a few effective ways to deal with them. I honestly do not think I can call enough attention to how good the stadium level is. Genuinely makes you feel like you're up against overwhelming odds while simultaneously die-harding your way through vents and stairwells, desperately searching for that one path that'll finally give you the opportunity to escape. In general, I feel kind of bad about paying what is essentially lip service to these interstitial levels that bridge the gap between hub areas. The rich, brilliant, fully featured levels that show off Afterglow at some of its most entertaining. The stadium is followed by an on-foot trek through first a mutie-occupied construction yard, and a few Easter egg-laden train carriages, leading you inevitably right on down to Mutie Town. Mutie Town, in of itself, is a pretty chunky location consisting of multiple buildings to battle through and explore. And yes, as the name implies, they are absolutely infested from top to bottom with muties. Good opportunity to get some usage out of your Junker musket here, which is your de facto sniper rifle, although mutants do tend to zigzag around a little too much for effective usage of the scope. While you're shooting up the place, you might as well spend some time seeking out one of the more intriguing curiosities of Mutie Town, that being Larry the Meat Merchant. I'd tell you what you can get up to by interacting with Larry, but I feel that would spoil some of the fun. All I'll say is that he has some very interesting ideas on business strategy in the post-everything paradigm of the post-apocalypse. After a pretty involved exit from the back of Mutie Town, you'll find yourself stumbling along a long-abandoned gig for the awesome-sounding Pain Elementals, a location that, in my opinion, is in dire need of some pyrotechnic know-how. Beyond that, you'll run into a friendly getting ambushed, entirely possible to mess up and allow this friendly to die, though thankfully this doesn't impact much on your own sense of pride. Either way, you'll be blasting raiders away, and after that, it's one last occupied checkpoint before grabbing yourself quite possibly the most left-field replacement for a motorbike you could imagine, a pit fiend matriarch. This whole thing, by the way, post-stadium was just one level. It was ridiculous. Last level before we finally reach the second hub area would be the array. I'm not going to tell you too much about the array, other than after blasting through some mutie-infested caves, it features a section that has what I personally regard as the second most effective spooks in the entire episode. Naturally, with that, you may now be wondering what exactly constitutes the most effective spooks in this entire episode. Well, all I'm going to say on that front is it involves that aforementioned secret level, a Soviet nuclear submarine, and heavy usage of the word nope.
If you're a raider, you can eat a dick.
After all that, here we are, at long last, on the doorstep of a town called Prosperity. Despite the name, Prosperity has its own share of issues. Firstly, there's the whole class divide, upper town and the ruling water baron lording it up over the comparatively squalid lower towners. And then there's the other stuff. such as the spore inhalation making folks sick, rumors of man-eating plants over in the botanical gardens, and then there's that whole issue of a highly organized raider gang over at the scrapyard that may or may not have my missing bike. So yes, Prosperity is very much your new Michonne, only bigger, more complex to navigate, slightly more people to talk to. Same can be said of the new area you get to explore. Basically, you're going to be putting that Pit Fiend Matriarch mount to good use as you traverse the various roads that link all of its locations together. Also, there's a Pit Fiend track if you fancy doing some racing, because of course, Prosperity has a Pit Fiend track. Just whatever you do, don't talk to this guy, he's an absolute douche. Anyways, as for where to start first, I'd say after the benefit of a few runs, the reactor site is probably the best place to get started. And that's largely to do with the fact that your reward for clearing it is a hazmat suit. Much like the key from the Westside Motorcycle Emporium, the hazmat suit essentially is a key item that becomes vital when it comes to accessing latter areas. I dare say it could almost have started to feel Metroidvania-like if it had a few more applications besides that one part where you actually need to use it. As for what kind of enemies you'll be up against during the course of the reactor site, hope you like pit fiends and trash hags because they feature in spades. Interestingly, there also seems to be a location-exclusive enemy type here in the form of the mutant sniper. They are effectively creepy little goobers who laugh maniacally at every possible opportunity and have an infuriating talent for finding unexpected locations with which to take potshots at you from. Overall, I'd describe it as a fairly low-key location. Things don't get absolutely crazy here. Pretty well-paced, pretty measured in terms of exploration and combat. There's also a few little secrets that you can dredge up through here. One will depend entirely on how prepared you are to thoroughly irradiate the crap out of yourself, whereas the other is another locked safe puzzle where this time you have to engage with the absolutely fantastic arcade game within the game. I mean, just look it. It's great. Having survived the reactor site, it's high time to make tracks for the botanical gardens. Problem being, the route by road is a no-go, and the only other path is via the mutie-infested underground that lies below Prosperity. Named the Pipeworks, this is yet another in Afterglow's impressive raft of spookily atmospheric underground areas, taking quite the admirably long time before you're actually inflicted with combat. An escalating skirmish with muties here will see you turning valves before ultimately gaining access to a bunker that is completely saturated with poison gas, which, as you might imagine, is where the hazmat comes in handy. That said, there is a timer on the suits, so yeah, best not spend too much time futzing about down here. Does make for quite the interesting change of pace, however, doubly so when you don't actually have access to any of your weapons. After that, you gain access to an impressively horizontal tram ride that reminded me somewhat of the underground trams in Resident Evil 2, but this one gets us within spitting distance of the gardens. Oh goody, the trash hags are back again. In all honesty though, they're gonna be the least of your problems during the course of the botanical gardens, not compared to what awaits within the dome. Lovely place. Warm climate all year round, lush greenery, man-eating, acid-puking plants, and, of course, there's the gas bags. The gas bags are an intermittent nuisance throughout Ashes, but here they're accentuated with the presence of the gas bag colony. Larger, floating horrors that puke homing projectiles at you and have an unfortunate habit of, much like the smaller namesakes, exploding on death. In all seriousness, though, it's a genuinely impressive location, one that adds a quite unique visual texture to the game that I'm not sure is really present in any of the other locations. Either way, it's an environment I'm much more comfortable traversing thanks to the enhanced and wider range of weaponry that's found its way into my hands. The triple barrel upgrade for the sawn-off shotgun, for example, very handy. You'll have also seen me pick up an assault rifle way back during the course of the array, but truth be told, ammo is kinda hard to come by for that one. Happily, I do have plenty of canisters for my Master Blaster here, which has a secondary that proves quite effective when it comes to the subject of rampaging shrubbery. Aside from that, there's also these little red plants that grow in patches throughout the dome. They're quite literally explosive. The true endgame of the Chili Pepper Scoville scale. It's worth being as thorough as possible during your exploration of this labyrinthine botanical nightmare. One of the side objectives that you can cache in here requires a minimum quantity of spore samples, and if I'm not mistaken, there's also a key item here that'll pique the interest of the Water Baron back in Prosperity's Uptown. Either way, you'll still have to contend with not just the plants and the horrifying gas bags, but also a hefty number of muties by the time you reach the back end of this location. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the Botanical Dome is easily one of the most impressive locations in Ashes Afterglow to me. Not just for the fact that it actually takes place under a physical dome, which I've no idea how they got working, but for the fact that it also blends together so coherently in terms of level design. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. Anyways, after battling your way through a few more plant-infested cultivation labs and taking a very atmospheric trip through the ruined bioluminescent underground, it's officially time to return to the surface and head on back to Prosperity. This is where we pretty firmly get into the back end of the Prosperity Hub questlines, so consider yourself spoiler warned, but in all honesty, if you've made it this far listening to me drone on about Afterglow, why not go the whole hog? As previously alluded to, Prosperity isn't experiencing the most prosperous of times. Strict water rationing and a limit on how long you can hang around has made the residents of Lowtown Prosperity generally disgruntled. That said, the so-called Water Baron has been looking for something. Rumor of a resilient kind of seed, the type of seed you've just liberated from the depths of the Botanical Dome. Despite being on the quote-unquote nicer side of town, Uptown Prosperity doesn't really seem to have all that much going on. I mean, sure, the residences look a little bit more spiffy than the run-down shipping container chic of Lowtown, but really when it comes to socializing up here, you've got the guards, the trader, the tech guy in his junk caravan, and of course, the Water Baron himself. On first appearances, he seems to be a reasonably smart guy. I mean, he's got his little notepad. Technically makes him a scientist, right? In any case, he's been looking for a way to solve the issue of keeping the people of Prosperity watered and fed, but it's kind of difficult to get, well, A, clean water, and B, anything edible at all to grow in the wasteland soil. The super seeds you've found, however, might just hold the key to fixing all of that. The resolution for that, however, will have to wait, considering that there's more significant trouble brewing on the horizon. Not just the organized horde of mutants that are migrating north for some mysterious reason, but more immediately, the raider squatters that have taken over the nearby scrapyard. Apparently, they seem to be fancying the idea of taking over Prosperity too. The Water Baron would like you to solve that problem for him, but ideally with the minimal degree of bloodshed. Additional incentive, they might also have your bike, so you should probably talk to them before you agree to anything concrete. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this isn't something you have to leave till endgame. You can rock up to the scrapyard any old time you like in pursuit of your bike and try and gain entry. But unusually for raiders, they seem a little bit more civilized than your average wasteland goons. They don't shoot on sight and actually seem reasonably talkative. The downside to this being is that you're not going to get in without taking care of some business for them first. As it just so happens, local bunker has a mutie problem. Guess who's going to have to go solve it? Anyways, with mutie problem, thoroughly solved, you now have limited access to the scrapyard. Here, you can find your way to speaking with head honcho Garavito, and you'll discover that he's got understandable issues with how Prosperity is being run. As the head of the roamers, who are apparently a big deal, he feels that he could probably run Prosperity better. To be honest though, I don't really care too much about that. Why? Because I'm pretty sure one of the douchebags in here has my bike. After hearing Garavito out and trading him some information on Prosperity, he will grant you access to the greater part of the scrapyard. You could try and gain entry before you have his blessing, but I'd only really recommend that if you're seeking additional holes in your body where there previously weren't none. This assuredly more peaceful method allows you to get a little bit more well acquainted with the various personalities within the Roma gang. However, there's only one guy that I really need to deal with. Douchebag in question, Hauer. Hauer thinks he's hot shit. Hauer needs to be challenged in order for you to win back your bike. Hauer is an all bark no bite bitch that brings most of his gang to try and deal with you. I, however, bring a toy laser gun that's been functionally useless until you upgrade it to tier 3, which, guess what, turns it into a flat-out incineration machine. Long story short, Hauer ain't Hauer no more, and I get my bike back. Hauer, in his wisdom, added a few modifications. He may have been a raging anal fissure of a man, but at least he had taste enough to slap machine guns to my handlebars. Unfortunately for the rest of the scrapyard aromas, however, multiple playthroughs of Ashes Afterglow have generally convinced me that they are still, for the most part, dicks. As a result, I decide it's probably in my best interest to head back to the Baron and agree to engage in a little bit of subterfuge and sabotage. The sabotage in question, sticking bombs in some choice locations around the scrapyard in order to take out the supplies and stockpiles. Believe it or not, there's actually multiple ways to screw this up, considering that there's a few different possible placements for the bombs in question. The most optimal ones won't arouse much suspicion. Sometimes, however, you might need to smooth talk your way out of trouble, but ultimately once the deed is done, that is pretty much it for the roamers. Anyway, for some reason, the game didn't want to play me the explosion effect for the scrapyard, so, yeah, this is all I can give you. And so, here ends your time in the Prosperity Area Hub. Naturally, there's still plenty of places left for you to poke around both within and around the main locations. Actively encouraged, in fact, if you feel the urge to stock up on that all-important junk, or if you fancy defusing some tripwire bombs for free pipe bombs. You might also want to give your faithful pit fiend mount a nice home before you leave. As far as I can tell, you can't really take her north anyway, and the Wrangler in front of Prosperity will happily take her off your hands for a few additional bits of junk. At this point, I feel it's important to remind you that despite giving you a pretty broad idea of what you can get up to at each respective hub during the course of Ashes Afterglow, I've actually been quite purposefully vague about certain elements, and more importantly, the overarching story that's threaded throughout Afterglow and Ashes as a whole. For the final section here, however, it's a bit unavoidable, which is why I'm not actually going to go into detail about this very final section. All you need to know is that it is a suitably epic capstone to Afterglow that is well worth the journey and will have serious, wide-ranging implications for wherever the Ashes series heads next. It is without an ounce of hyperbole that I say, I am excited. Overall, this will be something like the third time I've played through Afterglow. I absolutely love it to bits. Authors Vostyok and Reformed Joe, not forgetting Primeval either for his stellar soundtrack contributions throughout the course of this, deserve to be proud of what they've created here, because even with more entries to go, I personally regard the Ashes series at this point as an all-timer when it comes to the pantheon of doomed total conversions. I hope, at the very least, this video will encourage some of you out there to try the Ashes series for yourselves, because believe me when I say, it is one heck of a ride. There is honestly so much to experience and discover, And even after a lengthy video such as this, there's plenty left to find. Plenty of secrets to root out, and heck, there's even an entire secret weapon that I haven't touched on during the course of this that you can construct, provided you go seek out its component parts. Either way, you should absolutely give Ashes Afterglow, nay, the entire series of Ashes so far, a try. Pretty sure you won't regret it. Somewhat handily, the ModDB page for Ashes not only includes the entire saga so far, but also makes it extremely easy to launch each episode with relatively minimal knowledge, or even needing to own a copy of Doom for that matter. So yeah, you got no excuse. Get busy scavving. In any case, I genuinely hope that you've enjoyed this bumper episode of Doom Mod Madness. I apologize for the wait between entries. The time I have available to make these videos is increasingly squeezed these days, and from what I can tell, it's gonna be squeezed even more thanks to the arrival of even more Doom babies to the fold. Yep, if you didn't already know, now you do. Twins. It's gonna be carnage. But I guess it's about time for me to finally say, this has been Mr. Icarus. And until next time, whenever that may be, and whatever form that may take, Icarus out.